Welcome to our first century. I'm Krista Davenport, and today we're thrilled to take you behind the scenes of our book, The Centennial Salute. This remarkable piece commemorates 100 years of T.A. Loving's history, legacy, and impact. We want to thank Lee Pace, the author and designer of the book, for documenting our history. Joining us today are two incredible guests, Paul Hunter and David Philyaw, who played key roles in bringing this book to life. We're so excited to hear their insights and reflections. So let's dive in. David, let's start with you. Having been at T.A. Loving Company for 21 years, you're often referred to as the company historian. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience over the past 21 years and how you became so knowledgeable about T.A. Loving Company's history?
Sure. So I guess first off, historian makes me sound old. So I get that quite a bit, and I don't know that I'm the best one to tell the history of the business because there's so many people here that have been here longer than I have. But a little bit about my background with the company over 21 years. So I'll tell you a funny story. The first time I applied for a job here, got a nice letter that said we weren't hiring. So it eventually worked out. But the history of the company, I guess if you love this industry and you love who you work for, it's sort of a natural thing for me to want to know more about it. So we've got a history that nobody can repeat, and I don't think it'll ever be touched in terms of longevity and the things we've built and the places we've gone. So the more I found out about it, the more I wanted to find out about it, the more I wanted other people to hear it. So that's sort of what was important to me about the history, was just making sure it got down on paper where it wasn't forgotten.
I do think that's one of the things that's most important about this year, is that we are capturing everything that's happened over the past 100 years. Because to your point, if you do not take time to get it down on paper, it disappears into thin air.
Yeah, sure does.
Paul, tell us a little bit about your story. You are a legacy of T.A. Loving Company. Your mom, Ann Hunter, is the niece of Taylor Abbott Loving. So talk to us a little bit about how the history of the company played a role in your life growing up and now.
Yeah, so it's a pretty easy thing for me to talk about. I will say that. So my grandfather was John Loving. That was Taylor's brother. And since I've been a little boy, some of my earliest memories that I can remember were probably the first one, and this is something I always remember, was over at our shop, which is only about a mile from here. The utility division used to be over there on the yard, and Jerry Smith and Don Robinson and my dad that was their office over there, and it was an old wooden building, and it was ragged. And I can remember I must have been 3 or 4 years old, and my father carried me in there, and I was laying on the floor. I can remember it plain as day. It's definitely the first thing I remember of the company, was looking through a knothole that was in that floor at the earth down below the building. And that was probably one of my first memories. I can remember probably my 5th birthday party. I can remember my father brought it was a rubber tire backhoe at the time. They did not have rollover protection on rubber tire backhoes, and had my 5th birthday in the backyard. All the kids in the neighborhood coming over, playing on the rubber tire backhoe. And but as we went forward, I turned 16 and I started working for the company at the time. And I'm gonna get somewhere with this. This is all where it's heading. When I turned 16, I started working for the company, and I was working at the shop, and I got to be best friends with a broom for an entire summer. That was my job. I was a mechanic's assistant, and I swept that place till it was clean over those 3 months. And but working on the job, I was getting to travel with the mechanics, going on jobs, getting to see what T.A. Loving did, and I don't need to leave this out. As I was growing up, my father carried me to a lot of jobs, and I got to see everything we did. We traveled up to our family, and John Loving and T.A. were both from up in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, so we were traveling up there to see family a lot. And so we were constantly stopping in Richmond at the time to go to job sites. The viaduct projects, we were working on gates at the time. They built a big overpass, I believe, if I remember correctly at the time. We were probably doing work at the wastewater plant. And going and seeing my father working with all those guys, I always had to sit in the car. I wasn't getting out, but I've been running all over the place. But I did get to see a lot of that then. And, you know, as a kid, getting to see how cool that was and always thinking about construction and playing in the sandbox at my house with a rubber tire backhoe toy. But, you know, back to as I came along, the shop was the first real experience, and I was working hard. They worked me to death. I had a uniform at the time that they don't wear. Some of them still wear uniforms, but we used to all wear uniforms and come out of there covered in grease every single day. But so I worked through there, and all the way through high school, I was working, and I was always working with people that were really great. That was one of the things that I really caught on to pretty quickly. Everybody I worked with was always awesome. I enjoyed it. So I worked through high school, and I went to college in '99 at ECU for construction management. And my first summer, I worked for the building division, and I worked on top of a pharmaceutical plant they were building at the time. And it was a huge building. It was like 250,000 square feet with a black membrane roof. And I spent the entire summer working on top of that roof. And I was like, if I ever get off
150 degrees.
Oh, it was horrible. We were building penthouses for the air conditioning intakes on the structure. And I don't know a lot about building work, but I do know they cut those air intakes on 2 days before I left. And you could sit in there and it was like 40 degrees cooler. So that was neat. But I worked through all the divisions is what I'm getting at. I worked for the building. I worked for bridge. I worked for utility a couple of times. And I do want to throw this in here. The hardest summer I had was working through the utility division. And that was ultimately the division I worked for most of my years that I've been here. I worked for a gentleman, George Cobb, and David knows George really well. George is not with us anymore, but he was this little short guy, and he had the highest pitched voice, but he was an absolute go-getter. And I worked with him one summer here in Goldsboro, of all places, and we were laying deep gravity sewer, and it was probably the worst conditions you can imagine, probably the worst conditions I've ever been exposed to. And George was, when he was the guy inside the trench box, and when he got down to grade, it was serious business, and he would he yelled at me all summer long. I was like, they would dump a bucket of rock on top of me. You know, you had to. I mean, it was serious business when he was going to get that joint of pipe in right then and there, because you didn't have any time to mess around. But I enjoyed working through all the divisions. I got to learn everything about TA11 Company, and I'm going to go back to it again. I was working with some really good people. And so I got through college. I did it in 4 years. I'm going to get to this. I wish I had stretched it out a little bit more, because I got out of college and I came to work. And my boss at the time was Kenneth Smith. And Kenneth picked me up. He said, I'll pick you up at 9 o'clock here at the office, and I'm going to take you out and meet your crew. I was going to be a foreman for the company. And he carried me out to a job. We had just started a job here in Goldsboro at the new Wayne County power plant for CP&L, and we were doing all the underground infrastructure work. And he dropped me off, and Kenneth literally opened the door for me and pushed me out the truck. And Kenneth treated me really good, but he literally pushed me out the truck. He gave me the thumbs up and told me good luck. And I had not met the crew. I walked out, met everybody in my crew, and I worked with those guys for the next 5 years as a foreman. And I was really starting to head in a good direction. I was learning about working with people. I moved all the way up through all the positions, and somewhere in there, I enjoy having a relationship with everybody in this company. And somewhere in there, Steven Salter or Barry Reeves. Barry's retired from us, but Barry was with the company for a really, really long time. Barry told me about my grandfather. Oh. And this is where I'm heading with all this, is Barry told me about my grandfather. I didn't know a whole lot about it. I knew my grandfather. I was probably 15 or 16 when he passed away in 93 or whatever, 94. And but I always knew him just as my grandfather. I never knew anything about him as John Loving at T.A. Loving Company. He always wore a T.A. Loving hat, like denim hat and a jacket. And Barry told me, and it's in the book, and people are going to get to read all about it, but I didn't hear it from the source that's in the book. I heard it from Barry, or Stephen told me that they called him Captain John. And that stuck with me when I found out about that. And one of the things I probably got from my grandfather and my dad's always been good about this, but, about working with our employees. But, they talk about, in the book, we talk about he was a real prince of a person. And he was treated his employees well. And that is one of the things that, we're talking about how growing up at T.A. Loving Company, one of the things that has been most important to me was, hearing that from Barry, or I don't know if it was Barry or Stephen, I need to ask him, but Barry telling me how my grandfather was, because I didn't know a thing about what he was and how he was around people. And, one of the things here at the company is, making sure that it is our culture and looking after our employees and looking out after each other. But, that was one of the big things of my upbringing here at T.A. Loving Company. I know that was a long ways to get around to it, but it was neat learning about my grandfather from the employees, because none of those guys were around when John was by the time he had retired, because he was probably retired before 1970. So, that's.
So it sounds like you learned some personal things in the process of writing the book for the company as well.
It's the way I evolved here at T.A. Loving Company. Yeah.
You've told me some other stories, and most of them involve you getting yelled at for something.
Oh, yeah. There was plenty of that over the last 30-some years. So, but no.
So thank you both for sharing your start at T.A. Loving Company. Let's talk a little bit more about your start for the development of the book. So, David, how did you approach the research process for the book, and what challenges did you experience along the way?
The research part of it was, I won't say it was easy, but it was easier than it probably would have been had I not been putting a lot of those things together over 20 years. So it's like anything else. What you do for a living, or your relationships or hobbies, if you enjoy it, you just want to do more of it. So I spent a lot of free time, nights and weekends, just looking into different things we had done. You know about like the Pettus Bridge in Alabama. Google's your best friend. You can start looking around on the internet and finding little bits and pieces, and eventually find bigger threads of information that help you kind of put a story together. But fortunately, I enjoyed it so much that when it came around time to talk about a book, we had a lot of that stuff sort of organized by decade. Not all of it by any means, and we still don't have it all, but we sort of just put Lee Pace on retainer and said, here's all this information, how do you want to organize it? And Lee sort of ran with it. Had some questions along the way. I guess some of the challenges we ran into were, if there was a gap, trying to figure out what fit in that gap. There's stories about projects and people that we still probably don't know the whole background, or the reason why we went somewhere. Why'd we go to California? Why'd we go to Idaho to do work? Florida was a big part of the business for a long time, and then all of a sudden it wasn't. So there was all sorts of things that we probably still need to try and figure out and remember. And unfortunately, we don't get it all in the book. So that's probably one of the biggest challenges, is trying to figure out what really needs to get in there and what can wait, or what can be in another volume one day. But the research part of it has not been terribly hard. We actually do have good records here. We've got financials that go back to the time when it was a sole proprietorship before it was incorporated. So we've got some of those old records from the 20s and 30s. Photos of old projects. The biggest challenge in terms of information was probably on the civil side of the business. All that work gets covered up, so miles and miles at a time of water lines and force mains, and we just bury them in the ground and nobody ever sees them. So we went through a period of time a few years ago where we were real intentional about trying to get more information and pictures, and even more recently, I think they're doing a great job of getting that stuff documented. So I think that was probably the biggest challenge, was trying to find that information. The stuff that the building side of the business does it's still out there and visible, and you can go look at it. So, but the challenge was probably the horizontal stuff, not including the bridges.
I'm gonna throw something in here. I think we struggled a little bit from 1925 to maybe 1940. That was tough. And then the beginning of the utility and all that is there's not a lot of information there on that either.
There was, I think if I look at it, you're looking at the 1940s and what was going on then, keeping good photographs and daily reports, thinking you're going to look at them 60 or 70 years from then, probably wasn't the first thing on their mind. It was, how do you manage 26,000 people in Fort Bragg? How do you, not only while you're doing that, you're in Florida building bridges and you're in Virginia building bridges. And you think about what they accomplished with what they didn't have, interstates and telephones and cell phones and computers. It blows my mind today. So
that's what I was thinking about when you mentioned Idaho, California, how much more challenging it would be to work at such long distances during that timeline versus now. And even today, there are challenges.
Yeah.
So seeing documentation of that would be really interesting.
Yeah.
I'm guessing we don't have much of that.
Not a lot. I mean, and some of those real sort of far-flung projects were joint ventures almost entirely, and who knows how many people we actually had out there. But just to have the idea or the guts to go that far says a whole lot about the people that were doing it. And hell, it might have been easier, when you didn't have a cell phone in your pocket where somebody could get a hold of you every 10 minutes.
Yeah, it was good to write a letter, and it'd take a week for them to get there.
I mean, these guys were packing up their families and moving to where the job was at, and I've seen stuff where Paul's grandfather was living in South Carolina or Alabama, and your mother was in school down there. He packed her up and took her down there. And, I mean, she just went with him where the work was at. So it's an interesting story, what we know about it.
So we just talked about maybe some gaps of information. Paul, I want to ask you, what surprises or discoveries did you come across in the process?
Yeah, just going on what David's talking about, and it's I thought about this, and it's the things that we talk about all the time, but and I'm gonna give you credit, David. You've done a fantastic job on the history, because David's always the one that's telling me this is what really matters, and this is what really happened. But Fort Bragg, we talk about that all the time, but the sheer undertaking of that and everything that was involved in it is just, you can't fathom what they did in 180 days.
Yeah.
And this, the size of the project. I know in the book we talk about, it was, what was it, 38 million?
It's 40 million bucks.
38 million.
2,000 buildings or something like that.
And that was in 1940. And now that would be, we've got in there, it's $1.8 billion.
That's a big number.
It is a big number, and it's hard to believe you could even build something like that. Well, the truth is, you could not build that now. It's not possible. We had 25,000 employees. I got to believe we were probably the largest employer in North Carolina.
Probably the largest in a few states.
Yeah, I don't know who would have 25,000 employees. A lot of what's in the book, David dredged up some incredible pictures of how we must have had everybody working in eastern North Carolina. Mm-hmm. There was only 16,000 people in Fayetteville at the time, in the city.
So when you look at that picture right behind us, I think about that too. Where did all of those people come from?
Yeah, well,
a lot of them from out of state. Yeah, they were coming from Kentucky and Georgia and Florida and other places that just didn't have anything to do.
But there wasn't any place for these people to stay. You imagine the logistics of that. They were building campers and wooden campers in the back of their vehicles and living in the back, and they would have a wood stove in the back. I mean, the pictures are just incredible. Whole families living in tents. But the truth is, the recession or the depression was not over. It was not even close to being over. Right. We had a big part in probably helping get the country out of the depression with Absolutely. All of that. Because it obviously it quickly came to an end with the war effort. But that was what they did there was just amazing, and that was, and I knew all about it. And that picture right there says volumes. But the fact that we built 3,000 buildings in 180 days is just I can't imagine how they even managed it.
I think one of the first stories I heard about that project, I don't know if Steve told me this or if I read it in an article or something about the work, but the payroll was so large. It was like 150,000 a day.
Yeah.
that none of the banks in Fayetteville could handle the payroll, so we paid cash on the job site.
We
every
had
day.
to pay cash.
And there was like 400 or 500 people that did nothing but handle payroll and people
Wow.
services,
Yeah.
HR. So it was just a whole staff of people down. I mean, bigger than we are now in terms of full-time employees just to handle the payroll.
Yeah, massively.
Massive. It was a massive undertaking.
And going from that to kind of the next thing that and David told me this a while back. He said, Fort Bragg is amazing, but you know what? The thing that might be even more amazing was Cherry Point. We finished Fort Bragg and
did it again.
Next thing we knew, we did it again, and this time it was $80 million. But I was just looking at some of the facts in the book. They cleared and I don't know the timeline. Maybe you do, but they cleared 5,000 acres in Havelock for that. I mean,
Wow.
I can't imagine even clearing that. They moved, I want to say, 10 million yards of dirt.
Yeah.
Developing that place, and it had maybe close to 2,000 buildings on it, but the concrete and everything, and they built that out of a swamp.
Yeah. I think we had a crew or several crews down there that were nothing but rattlesnake and mosquito abatement. That was their job, was to clear rattlesnakes and
trying to drain it to develop it.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that was the other one that those two are really. Those two jobs in particular are the ones that really, and obviously they're focal points for TA Loving Company. And but if I was going to talk to anybody about it, those are the two
hard not
jobs.
to talk about those.
Yeah, it is hard not to talk about them.
David, I want to come to you. We've got two integral families in the TA Loving Company business, and we've got chapters on them in the book. So we've got a chapter on the Loving brothers. We've got another chapter on the Bryan family, which really focuses on the people behind the company.
Right.
What stood out to you about their contributions and personalities?
I think if you start with the Loving brothers, the first thing that stands out to me is just the youth of those two when they decided they could come down here and do what they did. T.A. Loving was 25 or 6 years old. His grandfather was 18. If you think about today, if I think about putting an 18-year-old out there on a job site to run it, and they're out of sight like your grandfather would have been in South Carolina or Virginia or wherever, pick a bridge. The courage to come down here and do that, especially at that time, you're talking about, in the midst of what is getting ready to be a depression and, wars coming and all these different things, which granted they didn't know if any of that was getting ready to happen, but they came down here and cobbled something together that's lasted 100 years. And, when you start talking about the Bryan family, of course, they were an established family here in Goldsboro, and the assumption is that when Raymond Bryan, Steve's grandfather, was working for a smaller builder here in town, depression hits, bank calls in notes, and that builder goes out of business. And I think we all just assumed that the town was small enough then that Raymond Bryan knew T.A. Loving or vice versa. They bumped into each other somewhere, and the story may have gone. Raymond Bryan said, "Well, I build buildings. I don't build bridges. Do you want to start building some buildings?" And he was, one of the first 4 stockholders. So there was Paul's grandfather and T.A. Loving and a guy named C.B. McNary, who was the project manager for Fort Bragg. Those 4 guys were sort of the start of the nucleus of the whole thing. And, it's a shame that T.A. Loving passed away early. He was younger than Paul and I are now, which puts things in perspective for us. But, I think Steve's grandfather had a different attitude towards business and entrepreneurship. I mean, he was involved in a whole lot of things and saw what we did at Fort Bragg when T.A. Loving and John Loving were still here, and just helped expand the business probably beyond what T.A. Loving ever thought it would be. And we're lucky to work for what's now a 4th generation business, and we've still got the Loving family here, and we've still got the Bryan family here, and they let the people run it like it's their own. So it's a pretty unique thing.
I wanted to go back to, you talked about starting a company at 18 years old. And when we think about today, we have concerns about 18-year-olds coming out onto the job site. And we do it all the time. We bring interns out. You have to be at least 18. And most 18-year-olds today cannot go out and start a business in construction on their own. So when you think about it from that perspective, it's it's really interesting what they were able to achieve with the limited resources that they had.
In one of the most difficult businesses to try and get in and keep going to.
No, I think the stories that I've heard you talk about them having zero money and barely getting by. I mean, they were taking a huge risk. They jumped right into it and made it happen.
Yeah, I'm sure in those 20s and early 30s, there were a few times where they were wondering if it was going to work.
Yeah.
But, much to our benefit, it's still here.
All right, Paul, let's talk about the chapter in the book, What Could Go Wrong? That's an intriguing name for
What
a
can go
Could have been a
chapter.
lot longer.
And it's the construction industry, so what could go wrong? What is one of the most memorable stories of challenge the company faced and then overcame?
Yeah, I don't know that I'm going to answer this right. I thought about the question and what I would talk about, but I kind of went on a job. I think what I'm going to get at is every day when we're working, just like you just said, this is construction. This is what we do every day, is trying to figure out how we're going to fix what can go wrong, because it happens every day. Every single day, what we do at TA11 Company, there's something going wrong. So it's how we, and that's part of what we are at TA11 Company, keeping a relationship and all that, and be able to work with owners and, be able to jump on something and be able to fix the problem, because that goes a long ways. But I did pick a job, and of course, everybody in here has got something that they come up with, especially any employee at TA11 Company, something that's gone wrong and how we fixed it. But we did a water treatment plant in Williamston like 15 years ago. And Chris Myers was the project manager on it, and it was a big job for the time for TA11 Company. And Ty was heavily involved in the project, and it was, I'll tell you what it was a brand new water treatment plant, which was a big water treatment plant. It had new lagoons. It had a new raw water intake in the bottom of the Roanoke River in Williamston, in the very bottom of it. And then it had a new raw water pump station that had to pump the water maybe, I don't say, like a mile and a half to the new plant we were building. So we had all this going on in Williamston at one time. And the river, the conditions at the river, we drove a coffer dam at the river, and we didn't take into account when we drove the sheet pile, we didn't leave the sheets high enough up for a flood. We thought we did, but there was a big flood, and the water never actually would come over the top of the cofferdam. But, you had people out using the river, and this is the dead of the winter, too. I mean, it was cold. Like, water was very cold. And the water got so high on the cofferdam. There was no issues there with the cofferdam, stability, but they had burned lifting eyes, the holes in the sheets, to pick them up with the crane. And the wake on the boats would come by, and it was so close to going in, it would shoot a stream of water through that little lifting eye hole, and we were down there working in it. But the deal was, we had to get a pipe from the intake structure on the river there to the new pump station, which was about 600, maybe 300 yards or something. I can't remember, but it was 300 yards of the worst conditions you could ever imagine. It was right there on the river. It was in sand. There was nothing stopping the water from
Can we
getting.
go up there and look at that at night?
Oh yeah. That's what I'm getting ready to tell the story.
Yeah.
And so
Middle of the night.
we had our company meeting, and so we're away from the job, and we had somebody there working, but we came up with this plan that was concocted by a group of people in the utility division, that we were going to get a directional driller, which was not new, but it was newer technology, that we were going to drill that section of pipe so we didn't have to try to lay it. And directional drills are not meant to be on grade. The pipe had to be on grade, just like it was a sewer pipe taking sewer down the streets. It had to be flat, or it had to be on a percentage grade. We figured we could make it work. And so the guy shot the pipe, and we ended up showing up the night. It was David, myself, and my dad, and we had left the company meeting, and we were going to see this because this was going to be a big deal. And we get there, and it is a barn fire. I mean, everything has gone wrong. And the contractor, the sub that we've got, there's no doubt this is not good. And but we literally I bet we spent 5 months trying to fix that problem. And I mean, it was killing us. It was killing our employees. It was sun up, sun down every day. But
we just want to go see the hole in the river.
Yeah. But it was, but I will tell you, that's what T.A. Lovin does and like I said, I could come up with 25 other stories, and it could be work related. It could be the problems we've encountered, but we always have a way that as a group we'll get together and we fight our way through it and work through it, and working with the owners and working with all the involved parties. The Wooten Company was involved in it. I'm sure they worked with us the best they could, because it was like I said, it was
quagmire.
It was bad barn fire. But we did get through it, and one of the things I talked about getting dropped off. That's the whole thing. With getting we all work together as a team, and that was learning all that. And the bad jobs are the ones that I want to act like I want to forget them, but those are probably the ones for sure. Most. They are the ones that I learned the most from, and I'm sure that is for everybody. The bad jobs are the ones you always remember the best.
Those are the ones that bond you together with your work group too,
that's
right?
Exactly right.
Because you are in the middle of the tragedy, the drama, the trauma all together, trying to come up with a solution. We've talked about, what do? We solve problems, we manage relationships, we build things. I think we could distill down what we do into those 3 concepts. There's a lot more that we do on a daily basis. Yep. Those are probably 3 of the primary goals of our work. So, David, I want to talk to you about the book again, and I'd like to hear from you. What's the one story that you think most encapsulates the spirit of the book overall?
Not to sound like a broken record, but when you talk about I would just pick probably the 40s in general, and that's not a chapter in the book. We've got a chapter pretty much dedicated to the Fort Bragg and the military buildup, but that period of time and those projects, I think, are probably the most significant beyond what we're doing right now. We've certainly evolved a lot. From a payroll standpoint, we're a lot smaller business. I think, subcontracting work didn't exist as much back then as it does now. So to have that many people on the payroll, whether it was 24 or 5,000 or 10,000, made sense for the time. But those projects during that time period, if you go down the list and you talk about Fort Bragg and Cherry Point and Fort Knox and bridges in Florida and bridges, in Alabama. I mean, there was a lot going on for a business that was only 15 years old. So I think those were the sort of the watershed moments that said, this is going to be bigger than probably anybody ever thought it was going to be. And we've maintained, a level of business, not to try to get as big as some of the other people did. We didn't have as much competition back then as we do now. But I think we've grown the way we should have grown. And we've been able to maintain when others can't. And we're one of the last ones standing, that's been around that long. So that says a lot about everybody that came before any of us and will come certainly after us. So that's a long way to say just the 40s in general, I think, is that time period that's sort of fascinating. Mm-hmm. Outside of what we do right now, I'm fascinated by what we do today.
I got one little thing I want to add, talking about sections of the book that I wanted to mention earlier was one of the parts of the book that I think had the most meaning to me was the job list. So we put together a job list of all the jobs that T.A. Lovin has done since 1925, and it will make your head spin. When we first printed it, I think it was 30 or 40 pages long, and that was type. I mean, it's thousands and thousands of jobs.
And there's probably some missed in that too. Is the other
one of the things I kind of wrote myself a note was I knocked off a ton of jobs that didn't have any description from way back all the way up to now that we just didn't have the description there. There was no financial information there, just small jobs. But that list is something that I think a lot of our employees, when they're reading that book, are going. That's one of the first focal things they're going to jump on that list and go through it and see everything that they've done. But the list is incredible. I'm glad we did that.
Yeah, I think that was probably the only way, considering the sort of the amount of information we could go through and have Lee talk about, or how many pages did we want the book to be? Was it going to be 200 or 300, or 400 or 500? It could have gone, on and on and on. But putting the project list in there was about the only way we could try to touch everybody that's still working here and everybody that's alive that'll see that book, because there was no other way to describe every job and everybody that worked here and where we'd been and what we'd done. So the project list is pretty neat. I just wish I wish it was complete. I think it's probably 99% complete. Some people say, y'all been in business 100 years. There's got to be thousands and thousands of projects, and there's a lot, but there's not as many as you would think, because it's just like it is today. We get projects that are a year long or 2 years long, and we're not chasing 100 jobs a year. It's 15 or 20 on the building side. I mean, the utility side, civil side's gone up quite a bit in numbers, but we don't pursue a lot of things. It's just the things that fit well with what we do.
It's a big list, though.
It is. It
is a big list.
It did add 40 pages to the book.
Yeah, there you go.
It is a big list, and I think part of that list is on the website in the Centennial section, so our listeners can go out and take a look at that as well. We're working to add some additional states on there. We started kind of in our main area, but even what we have out there gives a pretty good understanding of the large amount of projects that we've done over time. So, Paul, as TA Loving Company celebrates our centennial, how do you see the company's legacy carrying forward into the future?
We got great leadership right now at TA Loving Company. The way everything's set up right now, I think our culture is something that is not going to change. I think that's a lot of people have, businesses have come and gone. We have weathered the storm, and I think a lot of that has to do with this whole conversation. How we've gone through the first 100 years. I think we've got good leadership, and I think the other part of that is we got great people coming up underneath people that are running this company right now. The whole company's great. All our employees, if we can maintain that, one of the things I was thinking about, I hope they're using all this information another 100 years from now when we're 200 years old, because we got this information now. I hope we don't lose it. They're going to have it to work with, and I hope that's it. But I think we're going to keep on going the exact way we are. Times are going to change. We've mentioned that. And, I don't know what our growth will look like in the future. We might turn into the biggest contractor in the world, or we might stay just how we are. But I think family's always going to be a word at TA Loving Company. And I think that's, I hope it is. That's what, that'll go a long ways with us making it for another 100 years.
I was thinking about the next anniversary, which would be 125, right? None of the three of us will still be working here at that time. So I do hope...
I got $2 in college.
I will not be working here.
I do hope that when we're celebrating 125, that all of this information is incorporated into that. What have we not talked about in terms of your experience with developing the book that's important to discuss today?
I think the only thing that ever worried me about the book was being able to tell enough of the story that you didn't leave something out or leave somebody out. And I still worry about that. I mean, the book's getting printed right now, and I go home some nights thinking, we probably should have gotten this in there. We probably should have gotten that in there. But the reality is we could have made that book as long as that countertop and not gotten all the stories in there. But I think it leaves room for other things, for stories to get told in other places. We've got this edition going on here. We're going to put a lot of new artwork up, pictures that people have never seen. We've got a lot of new ways, including this podcast, to tell stories about the business. So I do sleep a little bit better knowing there's other ways other than just, the book's not final, I guess is what I'm saying. We can capture some of that stuff in other ways. So, but I still worry about that.
It's been my concern.
Did we forget something?
That we're writing the book, thinking about trying to get everybody in the book, which is not possible. That book is written for everybody in the whole company.
It's fair to say you missed something, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
and
you
we
can't capture it all.
absolutely, that was really one of the things that you want everybody to be in it. And but that book is written for every single employee of TA Loan Company, and I think we did a good job, and I think we did a good job proportioning the book. That was been part of it. Is there too much vertical in it? You know how all that works, David. Well, you and I have fought with this for the last 3 years. The history, the timeline of it has a lot to do with the way that thing laid out, and I think it laid out good. But the book's been interesting writing it. I assume it has been about 3 years.
It's been a while, but Lee Pace did a fantastic job with it. He's written several other histories. He's never done a book on a construction company, so that was new to him. But he was familiar with us from some work we did at Chapel Hill, and knew a little bit about the company, and took real interest in it, and was really given no direction on this is what's got to be in the book. He brought it to us and said, "This is what I want to do," and we just fed him information for it. So
he didn't know what he was getting into trying to manage you and me.
He did not. Yeah. We were late on a few things with him.
Yeah, but, oh man, writing a book was
he got mad at us a few times.
Yeah, but Lee, I do want to thank Lee.
He's a solid dude. Yeah.
I want to tell a real quick story, and I went to a Carolina football game. It's my daughter's at Carolina. She's starting her year, and one of the first things I did was share with Kate. In the book, there's a map of all the UNC buildings we built, which is amazing.
Right.
And so I gave it to Kate to look at. She just started her first year this past fall. So I'm at the football game, and
he was there.
I'm at the football game, and I'm listening to we leave. They're losing the game, and I'm listening to it. And they keep going back to the line judge or the line reporter, and they kept saying Lee Pace. And Lee is the line reporter for the home games for Carolina. He's out there interviewing the coach. He's out there interviewing the players. Yeah, I had no idea, so I picked up the phone, called David, and he said, "Yep, that's him." So that was pretty cool. But Lee did a great job putting up with us, and I think the book is really, really good, and I'm excited for everybody to see it.
You talked about some challenges in pulling the book together. You talked about what to include, what to exclude. Did we leave people out? Were there any other challenges that you faced in distilling down 100 years into a couple hundred pages?
I don't know that we ever had a conversation about we're not going to put this in the book. It was always, can we get this in there? It was never, this is planned to be in it, but we need to take it out. I don't think we ever had that conversation. That book grew from, I think, the first conversation we had with Lee when he was talking about, well, how big is it going to be? How much, money we're going to spend on it. We were talking about a 150-page book, and I think it's over 300 pages, maybe. Yeah, that sounds
250, 260. It might be 300.
So we kept adding. I mean, as much as we could add, but you still run into that, not a brick wall, but you run into that situation of how much more can we add, or how much longer can we take to get finished. I mean, he's got other things he's got to do, and we've got other things to do. So.
And one of the things I learned about writing a book is once you get to the final parts of it, there is no changing anything. You can't change a word. So you can't screw up his page layout, and that was that's a scientific process.
It is putting the book together for sure. I do like that we got a lot of people involved in it. It sounds like it was something Paul and I just got all this information and met with Lee and got it done. But there were a lot of people that pulled things together and got involved. I mean, our marketing folks in Raleigh helped with the project list and the people list. You helped with that. We had other folks, a lot of people that could, got interviewed and provided information. So we tried to recognize that in the front end of the book too, as best we could.
Paul, David, thank you for your time today on this podcast and giving us a peek behind the scenes. And thank you also for your time, effort, and commitment to the process of writing the book over the last 3 years.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you to our listeners for joining us today. We invite you to join us in our next episode, Family Matters. You can also follow us on all the social medias, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And we'd like to include you in the process. If you have questions that you would like us to answer during upcoming podcasts, please email us at podcast@taloving.com. We look forward to hearing from you.